So for the last decade or so, most of us just assumed Rick Ross was untouchable. The cigars, the mansion tours, the smirk, the constant, "I'm the biggest boss you've seen thus far" energy, it all worked, and it worked for years. But something cracked at exactly 1:30 in the morning Eastern Time, and the crack was so loud that the entire hip-hop industry felt the aftershock inside of 90 seconds. Drake, of all people, went live from his Toronto compound, sat down in a leather chair like a man who had already won the war, and pressed a single button on his phone. What came out of those studio speakers has completely rewritten the map of modern rap, and the people closest to Rick Ross are, right now, in emergency crisis mode. Every publicist attached to the Maybach Music Group brand has reportedly been up since sunrise. Every corporate partner is on hold. Every distribution executive is asking the same question. Is the boss still bankable, or is he finished by breakfast? And the answer, based on the phone lines lighting up inside 3 separate PR firms this morning, is looking uglier than anybody predicted 12 hours ago. Listen, this isn't a normal beef update. Real talk, what leaked out of that live stream tonight is being described by industry insiders as a career execution. The whisper going around every group chat and every private Discord server right now is that Drake didn't just play a clip. Drake played a private, deeply personal phone call in which Rick Ross, the self-crowned Miami mogul, the man whose entire brand is invincibility, is reportedly heard begging 50 Cent to stop trolling him online. Not joking, not laughing it off, begging, voice cracking, breath shaking, sponsors named out loud, the whole thing. And once you sit with that image for a second, you start to understand why every executive at Maybach Music Group is right now on the phone with lawyers instead of sleeping. This is not spin. This is not a rumor. This is the sound of a 20-year mythology collapsing in real time. And it is happening on a Tuesday morning in front of the entire world with zero option for a graceful exit. Now hear me out. To make sense of what just detonated tonight, you have to rewind through more than a decade of quiet resentment, corporate power plays, and personal grudges that built this toxic love-hate triangle between Drake, Rick Ross, and Curtis Jackson. This is not a fresh feud. This is a slow-cooked, 10-year-in-the-making cultural earthquake that finally decided to break the surface. And the deeper you dig into the timeline, the more it looks like Rick Ross walked willingly into a trap that had been baited, tested, and rebuilt 3 separate times before it finally caught him. Cast your mind back for a second. For over 10 years, the collaborative partnership between Drake and Rick Ross was one of the most lucrative pairings in the modern music economy. Together, the two of them shaped an entire sonic aesthetic. Champagne rooms, private jets, penthouse verses, Aston Martin ignition sounds behind the beat. Songs like Aston Martin Music, Stay Schemin', Lord Knows, and Gold Roses weren't just chart records. They defined an entire era of luxury rap and made Rick Ross look like the most protected artist in the game. Fans thought the bond between Drake and Rick Ross was permanent, untouchable, sealed in gold chains and $100,000 dinners. And publicly, it looked exactly that way for a very long time. Every red carpet appearance, every award show cutaway, every backstage clip, the two of them were positioned as brothers, mentors, business partners, and cultural co-architects. But past the studio walls, things had been fracturing for a while. As Drake's global commercial dominance climbed to numbers that made every other rapper in the industry look like a hobbyist, subtle jealousies started to circle the room. Rick Ross, a man whose ego is measured in acreage, reportedly began to feel like the little brother in a room he used to co-own. And that quiet shift, that small change in body language between the two of them at award shows, at industry dinners, at studio sessions in Miami, is exactly what insiders now point to as the beginning of the end. Then, when the larger rap civil war broke out and forced everyone to pick lanes, Rick Ross made a decision that stunned longtime listeners. Rick Ross severed his 12-year alliance with Drake and started publicly mocking the Canadian superstar with disses, memes, and constant timeline shots. The brotherhood was over, and the trolling had officially begun. Enter Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent, the undisputed emperor of internet warfare in this entire industry. For nearly 15 years, 50 Cent has waged a relentless, almost surgical campaign of ridicule against Rick Ross. That war goes all the way back to their infamous 2009 collision, and unlike every other rap beef that eventually cools off, 50 Cent turned mocking Rick Ross into a full-time art form. Every album Rick Ross dropped, every business venture Rick Ross announced, every drone shot of the Georgia estate, 50 Cent was in the replies, the comments, and the memes, hammering Rick Ross day after day, year after year, without a single week off. 50 Cent turned Instagram captions into surgical strikes. 50 Cent turned podcast interviews into public roast sessions. 50 Cent turned the very idea of the biggest boss into a punchline that regenerated itself every 72 hours, and Rick Ross could never fully outrun it. Publicly, Rick Ross played the same character every single time. The unbothered mogul. The Miami Don who was too rich to react. Rick Ross would smile through interviews, wave a cigar on Instagram Live, and insist that 50 Cent's obsession was nothing but free promotion. That was the story Rick Ross sold, and for a long time, a lot of fans bought it. But what fans did not see, what the Whisper Network has been quietly saying for 2 years, is that 50 Cent's constant trolling was actually costing Rick Ross real money. High-profile corporate sponsors, beverage distribution partners, festival organizers, and franchise investors reportedly grew nervous about the sustained ridicule. Budgets were being trimmed. Deals were being renegotiated. Meetings that used to close in an afternoon suddenly required legal review. The invincible boss armor was cracking, and it was cracking in silence. And Rick Ross knew it. Rick Ross felt it in his quarterly numbers before he felt it in his ego. And that is where the story pivots into pure warfare. Off camera, Drake and 50 Cent, two of the most feared strategists in the game, allegedly linked up. Not for a song, not for a feature, for a mission. Drake didn't want to trade radio dices with Rick Ross. Drake wanted a total, cultural, career-ending checkmate. And 50 Cent, after 15 years of poking at the same target, was reportedly more than willing to hand Drake the final weapon. That weapon was a phone call. A specific one. A confidential, cellular line, one-on-one conversation between Rick Ross and 50 Cent that, if the world ever heard it, would collapse the entire Biggest Boss illusion in a single evening. Drake held that file for weeks. Drake waited. Drake, apparently, is a patient man. And the patience is what makes this whole thing so much colder than any diss track ever recorded. Then came tonight. At exactly 1:30 in the morning Eastern Time, Drake pushed a live stream to his followers with zero warning. No promo. No thumbnail. No teasing tweet. Just a red dot. Within 90 seconds, more than 450,000 viewers had flooded into the stream, and by the 2-minute mark that number had cleared 600,000. Drake sat in a high-back leather chair inside his private studio, low neon ambient lighting behind him, a crystal glass of vintage champagne in his hand, and a small, cold, calculated smirk on his face. Drake said nothing for nearly a full minute. Just silence. Just the smirk. Just anticipation. The chat scrolled so fast the moderators could not keep up with the emojis. And then Drake tapped his phone, connected it via Bluetooth to the studio monitors, looked directly into the camera lens, and said 5 words that the internet is still repeating in disbelief. Turn the volume all the way up. What came out of those speakers next is being called the most humiliating audio leak in the history of hip-hop. A deep, unmistakable, southern baritone voice filled the room. It was William Roberts. Rick Ross. But this was not the confident, booming Rick Ross of 2 decades of anthems. This was a Rick Ross none of us have ever heard before. Frantic, broken, trembling, actually pleading. Rick Ross was on a private call with 50 Cent, and Rick Ross was, in full sentences, asking Curtis Jackson to stop. Every producer, every engineer, every hip-hop podcaster who has ever mixed a Rick Ross record recognized the exact vocal fingerprint inside of 2 seconds. There was no mistaking it. There was no explaining it away. Curtis, please man. You gotta ease up on these posts, bro. I'm being completely real with you. The sponsors are blowing up my management every single morning. The Belair people, the Wing franchise partners, the festival guys, they're pulling back dollars and holding up payments because of these skits and these sales numbers you keep putting on blast. You made your point to the whole world. Just let me breathe. Let me put this rollout together. I'm asking you peer to peer, brother to brother. Please stop clowning me on the timeline. Read those words again. That is Rick Ross. That is the biggest boss. That is the man who has spent 20 years telling the entire music industry he answers to nobody, feared nothing, needed nothing, and could not be moved. That Rick Ross was on tape, pleading with 50 Cent, naming corporate sponsors out loud, and asking his mortal enemy for mercy. The live stream chat froze. Grown men on Twitter typed "no way" over and over again like their fingers were on autopilot. The pauses in Rick Ross's voice, the panicked breathing, the specific dollar figure references, none of it could be faked, and every single person watching the stream knew it in the same second. Even the fans who had defended Rick Ross for a decade went silent. Even the loyalists could not spin what they had just heard. Drake paused the audio, looked back into the camera, delivered one line in a low, chilling whisper that is already being stitched into thousands of TikToks as we speak. The biggest boss. More like the biggest actor in the industry. Keep my name out of your mouth on these interviews, William, before I press play on the rest of this file. Then the screen went black. Nearly 500,000 people were left staring at a frozen frame in complete, paralyzing silence. And that is the exact moment the internet detonated. Within minutes, screen recordings of the audio were ripped, converted, and uploaded to every single platform on Earth. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. Every feed on the planet became a Rick Ross humiliation loop overnight. Reaction videos went up before hosts had finished putting their microphones on. Emergency podcasts were scheduled inside of 30 minutes. Hip-hop commentary channels were live before their lights had warmed up. Meme accounts that usually take a full day to react had captioned edits online in under 10 minutes. This wasn't a news cycle. This was a stampede. Hold that thought, because what happened next transformed this leak from a viral moment into an active corporate emergency. Roughly 40 minutes after Drake's live stream cut to black, high-resolution screenshots of what appears to be an encrypted text exchange between 50 Cent and Drake began leaking across private Discord servers and viral hip-hop forums. The messages, if authentic, prove that this wasn't a spontaneous, in-the-moment idea. This was a coordinated strike between two of the most calculating minds in the entire music business. In one of those leaked messages, 50 Cent allegedly wrote to Drake, "Let him keep flexing on Instagram for the cameras." The second he drops his next interview talking tough, hit him with the tape and bury that boss persona once and for all. Let's see him explain this to his investors. Another message in the same thread reportedly reads, "Timing is everything. Don't press play until the sponsors are already nervous." That way the tape doesn't just embarrass him, it costs him. Between us, that message alone changed the shape of everything. Rick Ross didn't walk into a rap beef. Rick Ross walked into a two-front billionaire ambush that was engineered, timed, and executed for maximum public destruction. And Rick Ross was reportedly asleep when it dropped. Every strategy meeting he sat in for the last 6 months had been happening while, on the other side of the continent, two men were mapping the exact hour of his humiliation onto a shared calendar. As the leaked audio swept across every social platform, the trending panel exploded. Hashtags like Rick Ross begging, Drake exposes Ross, Boss Down, and William Part 2 surged to the top of global trends inside of 2 hours, racking up more than 50 million impressions between them by sunrise. Commentary channels dropped emergency late-night streams, dissecting every single cracked syllable in the phone call. Some hosts replayed the 20-second sponsor naming section of the audio on loop for a full 10 minutes, freeze-framing on the exact micro-pauses in Rick Ross's voice. For millions of fans who had grown up on Rick Ross's cigar and champagne mythology, hearing William Roberts sound like a stressed-out CEO trying to save his quarterly numbers felt like watching an empire crumble in slow motion. At exactly 4 a.m. Eastern Time, Rick Ross made his first mistake. Rick Ross launched a panicked, unscheduled Instagram live broadcast from the passenger seat of a matte black luxury SUV racing through Miami. And the energy of that broadcast told the whole story before Rick Ross even opened his mouth. Sweat on the forehead, eyes darting to the windows, voice a full octave higher than Rick Ross's usual smooth baritone. Behind him, his inner circle could be heard, faintly, on other phone calls with what sounded like attorneys and distribution partners. There were 3 separate hushed conversations happening in the same vehicle at the same time. Rick Ross leaned into his phone screen and started shouting, "Turn this garbage off. Don't listen to these clowns. That audio is deepfake artificial intelligence trash. Drake is scared of the real pressure in the streets, so Drake paid a bunch of Silicon Valley computer nerds to synthesize my voice. Curtis knows I never picked up no phone and begged him for a single thing. This is a manufactured corporate smear campaign to distract everyone from Drake's own numbers. I built Maybach Music Group from the dirt. I am the biggest boss in this game, and no computer clip is going to change that. Don't fall for this internet matrix." Rick Ross wanted defiance. What Rick Ross projected was damage control. The hands were shaking. The eyes were red. The engine noise was frantic. And the internet, which had already heard the audio, refused to take the bait. Within minutes of Rick Ross's live going up, screen record clips of Rick Ross's own panic were being cut against the leaked phone call in split-screen edits. And the contrast was devastating. On one side of the screen, Rick Ross screaming into a phone about deepfakes. On the other side, Rick Ross begging Curtis Jackson to save his sponsors. The same voice, the same cadence, the same panicked micro-pauses in the same places. Even people who wanted to believe Rick Ross could not unhear the match. Then, at 6:15 a.m. Eastern Time, the story slid further downhill in a way Rick Ross could not have anticipated. A well-known independent audio forensics engineer, the same kind of specialist who works with courts on cellular evidence, published a 20-page technical breakdown of the leaked file across major music industry forums. Using spectral frequency analysis, background room resonance mapping, and acoustic waveform matching, the specialist concluded, with a stated confidence of 99.8%, that the audio was authentic and unaltered. The file carried the hardware compression signature of a direct cellular line. The ambient room acoustics matched Rick Ross's own Miami studio office. And critically, the report ruled out any possibility of artificial intelligence generation or voice cloning. There was no synthetic residue. There was no neural artifact. There were no telltale phoneme boundaries that give away modern voice synthesis. It was Rick Ross. Full stop. That report hit the wire like a second bomb. Within minutes, industry executives at multiple beverage brands and lifestyle partners connected to Maybach Music Group were reportedly convening emergency conference calls. The whisper going around every music business Slack channel this morning is that at least 2 multi-million-dollar promotional contracts are being paused pending reputational review, which, in industry language, is the polite way of saying somebody is getting their partnership yanked before the weekend. Compliance departments at 3 separate national retailers were reportedly reviewing whether product placements tied to the Rick Ross name should be quietly pulled from their upcoming marketing calendars. Nothing had been announced. Nothing had been publicly stated. But the wheels were already turning, and every industry veteran knows exactly what that particular flavor of silence sounds like. And then Curtis Jackson stepped back in with the timing of an assassin. 50 Cent posted a video from his private gym. Oversized headphones on, champagne in hand, laughing directly into the camera, singing along, badly, to Drake's greatest hits while lifting weights he clearly wasn't actually lifting. And under the video, the caption, "I told y'all he was crying behind the scenes. I told y'all the boss was calling my phone begging. Real bosses don't beg another man to save their brand deals." Drake hit the button and dropped the bomb. The comedy show is just getting started. William Part 2 drops tonight. That caption alone racked up over 3 million likes inside of 1 hour. The post crossed 20 million views before noon. And in a follow-up story, 50 Cent posted a still frame of the exact moment in Drake's live stream, where the audio first hit the speakers, with the caption framed and hung. That single story was reposted more than 100,000 times before it disappeared from the 24-hour window. Rick Ross's empire was, at that moment, officially in free fall. Trapped between 50 Cent's mockery on one side and Drake's arsenal of unreleased audio on the other, with corporate partners quietly heading for the exit doors and no clear escape route in sight. The digital earthquake triggered by the leak split the entire entertainment landscape into 2 furious camps within a matter of hours. On one side, a massive wave of commentators, meme creators, and hip-hop purists treated the leaked call as the definitive execution of Rick Ross's public persona. One viral post read, "Rick Ross literally begging Curtis Jackson to call off the internet trolls because beverage sponsors were cutting checks is the most humiliating moment in hip-hop history. The Boss Act is permanently canceled." Another read, "Drake didn't even need a diss track. Drake connected a phone to the speakers, played 30 seconds of raw audio, and ended a 20-year rivalry in one broadcast." A third widely shared thread said, "You cannot rap about being a cartel-level kingpin the day after the whole world heard you begging another man to stop me my NGU. The persona is retired. Museum it." On the other side, an equally loud faction of Southern hip-hop traditionalists and privacy advocates rushed to Rick Ross's defense. Their argument was simple. Weaponizing a private phone call crosses an unwritten line, the kind of line that used to matter in this culture. One post from a well-followed Southern rap historian read, "Regardless of the leak, Rick Ross built a legendary catalog with his own 2 hands. Watching corporate giants conspire to destroy an independent black label owner is not a victory. That is predatory business at its worst." Another read, "Drake couldn't win the chart war, so Drake resorted to digital espionage. Real veterans don't leak phone calls. That is the softest move in modern rap." A third defender wrote, "Since when did recording a private conversation and playing it for 500,000 strangers become a flex? Y'all cheering for a wiretap. Think about that." The shockwave leaped past the timelines and hit terrestrial radio by sunrise. On The Breakfast Club and Hot 97, morning shows opened phone lines to listeners from New York, Miami, and Atlanta, and every single call segment devolved into shouting matches inside of 90 seconds. Entertainment attorneys and crisis PR specialists were pulled onto the air to explain what this actually meant, in dollars, for the Maybach Music Group corporate portfolio. The consensus from the legal side was brutal. Active endorsement contracts almost certainly contain morals clauses, and morals clauses activate the moment a partner's public image sustains this level of damage. One attorney on air went so far as to say that in his professional experience, This kind of leaked audio triggers immediate suspension of pending payments in most standard beverage and lifestyle contracts, whether the artist agrees with it or not. That kind of statement, said out loud on morning drive time radio, is not a rumor. That is a warning shot to every partner in Rick Ross's orbit. When a working entertainment attorney goes on air and openly discusses how contracts get paused, every executive listening in the car understands the message. Get your paperwork off this brand, and get it off before the story escalates any further. Behind the scenes in Florida, panic was reportedly spreading through every corner of Rick Ross's professional infrastructure. Booking agents were pausing summer festival deposits. Regional promoters were reviewing whether to move forward with scheduled Rick Ross appearances. And venue partners were quietly asking the same question. Is this brand still safe for our stage? 2 mid-market Southern festivals reportedly held internal calls this morning to review whether to reassign Rick Ross's headlining slots to backup acts, citing what one insider described as an unacceptable level of ongoing narrative risk. Nothing has been publicly canceled. But in the live event business, that particular silence, that particular delay in confirming a headliner's promo push, always means the same thing. Someone is waiting for the situation to either resolve or explode, and neither outcome is comforting for the artist at the center of the fire. And 50 Cent, of course, poured more gasoline on the fire. That same afternoon, 50 Cent posted a fake corporate restructuring chart to his Instagram page, positioning himself as the newly appointed CEO of Maybach Music Group. In the fake org chart, Rick Ross had been demoted to intern in charge of luxury car detailing. Whale had been reassigned to morale department. Meek Mill was labeled on sabbatical. The whole roster was mapped like a corporate obituary, and the post crossed 12 million views before dinner time. A follow-up post from 50 Cent's account read, "New leadership. Same champagne. Fresh receipts." It hit 2 million likes in under 3 hours. Every reply column was filled with laughing emojis and screen-recorded loops of the original audio. The mockery was, at that point, faster than the news cycle itself. The entire entertainment world was paralyzed, torn between disbelief at the sheer level of disrespect and stunned silence at the speed with which an untouchable empire had been reduced to a punchline. Radio jocks who used to open every Rick Ross feature with reverent introductions were suddenly opening segments with jokes. Barbershops in Atlanta and Houston were reportedly playing the audio on loop as background entertainment. Even overseas commentary channels in the UK, Nigeria, and France were dropping same-day reaction videos, most of them clocking hundreds of thousands of views inside of 6 hours. This wasn't just an American story anymore. This was global. And then, just when the story looked like it had reached its peak, one more twist surfaced from behind locked studio doors that threatens to escalate this from a beef into a full-blown scorched earth catastrophe. At 7:30 in the morning Eastern Time, an anonymous audio technician working inside a high-security recording compound in South Beach leaked a 45-second studio clip that sent pure adrenaline through every commentary channel online. In the leaked studio footage, Rick Ross is inside a soundproof vocal booth, flanked by heavy security and several Southern rap veterans, recording what industry insiders are already calling the most vicious retaliation diss ever conceived in the modern era. Rick Ross is screaming into the microphone, waving a thick stack of printed financial documents at the camera, and directly calling out what he claims are Drake's private offshore accounts, secret corporate ghostwriting agreements, and confidential NDA settlements paid in Toronto to keep certain names buried. 2 of the veterans standing behind Rick Ross in the leaked footage are reportedly recognizable within the industry as men who have never publicly aligned with Rick Ross before, a signal that this retaliation is drawing in allies who normally stay out of these conflicts. The exact line captured on the leaked studio audio. "You leaked a 30-second phone call to play with my livelihood. Now I'm dropping the real bank wire receipts, the shell companies, and the confidential settlements you paid to keep your name clean in Toronto. You want to play billionaire games with Curtis Jackson? I'm about to burn this whole industry down with us." The visual of Rick Ross, still bruised, still angry, and now armed with what he says are financial receipts pointing straight at Drake, set off emergency alarms across executive boardrooms from New York to Los Angeles. This was no longer a rap feud. This was a mutually assured destruction scenario, and Rick Ross had just picked up the launch keys. Legal analysts on entertainment television were, within an hour, openly discussing whether the mere threat to release private financial documents on record in a music release could itself trigger civil exposure. Nobody in the industry could remember a modern instance in which an artist had, in a leaked studio session, directly waved what he claimed were bank wire receipts of another artist at the camera. It was, in every meaningful sense, a threshold moment. Once that visual hit the internet, The conversation stopped being about rap and started being about liability, and every label attorney with a stake in either camp began drafting protective language before the sun was fully up. But before the culture could even process Rick Ross's studio threat, Drake's team delivered a counterstrike that shifted the entire scale of the war. At exactly 8:45 in the morning, Drake posted a single image to his private Instagram broadcast, a high-resolution photograph of an encrypted digital hard drive labeled with one ominous title: the full 12-minute master recording. Underneath that image, Drake attached a live 24-hour digital countdown timer. And below the timer, one cold caption: "You drop that record, William, and the full 12-minute tape drops on every streaming platform on Earth. Let the world hear you crying about your car payments, your label debts, and what you really said about your own artists behind closed doors." Don't press that button. Read that again. The 30-second clip that shattered the internet last night was, by Drake's own admission, only a preview. The full 12-minute master allegedly contains admissions from Rick Ross about corporate debt, private business betrayals of former Maybach Music Group signees, and off-the-record confessions that could permanently damage multiple careers across the industry, not just Rick Ross's own. If that tape drops, it does not just end Rick Ross. It ends relationships. It ends contracts. It ends legacies. Multiple currently signed MMG artists were reportedly seen entering emergency management meetings this morning, presumably because whatever is on that 12-minute tape may include references to them, their deals, or the private opinions Rick Ross has expressed about them in unguarded moments. The entire culture is now standing at the edge of a cliff, watching a countdown timer tick down in real time. If Rick Ross releases the retaliation track exposing Drake's alleged offshore empire, Drake presses play on the 12-minute tape and obliterates whatever is left of Rick Ross's public standing. If Rick Ross backs down, Rick Ross concedes publicly to the two men who spent a year building the trap, and the biggest boss persona is finished by surrender instead of by fire. Both titans are standing with their fingers hovering over launch codes, and neither one is showing a single sign of backing down. This is, in the truest sense of the phrase, mutually assured destruction, and the next 24 hours will decide which empire survives. Every hour that ticks by without a Rick Ross concession makes it more likely the tape drops. Every hour that ticks by without a Drake concession makes it more likely the retaliation record hits streaming platforms first. Neither man can afford to blink, and both men know it. This is the kind of standoff where the first flinch decides the next 10 years of a career, and neither camp has any incentive whatsoever to be the one who moves first. Will Rick Ross ignore the countdown, drop the retaliation track, and swing for Drake's alleged financial paper trail to save his pride? Or will Rick Ross fold under the threat of the master tape and quietly walk away from a decade of built reputation? The countdown is ticking. The stakes have never been higher. And every executive, every artist, every A&R, every publicist in this industry is watching the same clock right now. This is not entertainment anymore. This is a live case study in modern reputational warfare, and it is playing out on the same phones the rest of us use to check the weather. There is one more layer that almost nobody is talking about yet, and it might be the most dangerous piece of this entire situation. Multiple reliable industry commentators have been quietly pointing out, since the audio dropped, that the original phone call between Rick Ross and 50 Cent had to have been recorded on 50 Cent's own device, because Rick Ross would never willingly record himself begging. Which means 50 Cent has, in his possession, an unknown number of similar recordings involving other artists, other executives, other private conversations built up across a decade and a half of trolling. If tonight's leak is the first shot of a longer campaign, and not the finale, then every artist who has ever privately reached out to Curtis Jackson to ask him to back off is currently sitting in front of the same silent phone, checking their notifications every 15 minutes, waiting to see if they are next. That paranoia alone has already changed how the private layer of this industry operates. Group chats that used to move fast are suddenly moving slow. Voice notes that used to fly across the industry every hour are being replaced by cryptic single-word text replies. Nobody wants to say anything on a recorded line right now, because nobody knows what tomorrow's leak looks like or whose voice ends up on the studio monitors next. And that is what makes this moment historic. It is not just about one leaked call. It is about the death of a certain kind of secrecy. From tonight forward, no artist who has ever picked up a phone to plead with a rival can be certain that plea is not sitting on a hard drive somewhere, waiting for the strategically correct week to detonate. That is a permanent change to the pressure environment inside modern hip-hop, and every serious player in the game just felt the ground shift underneath their feet at the same second. Real talk. This has been, without question, the most shocking and historic audio leak of the modern hip-hop era. And now I want to hear from you. because this community always sees the details that everyone else misses. Was Drake justified in dropping that phone call and finally ending the biggest boss myth once and for all? Or did Drake cross an unspoken line by weaponizing a private conversation for public entertainment? Do you actually believe the leaked audio is authentic? Or do you buy Rick Ross's argument about an AI-generated smear campaign? And what do you think happens if Drake actually presses play on the full 12-minute master? Does Rick Ross drop his retaliation record and force the nuclear exchange? Or does the biggest boss quietly go into hiding until the news cycle passes? Tell me exactly where you stand in the comments right now. I am going to be down there all day, replying to the sharpest and most passionate takes, so make sure yours is one of them. If your jaw hit the floor during this breakdown, hit that like button. It genuinely helps push this story out to every corner of the hip-hop world, and every single like this video gets in the next hour puts it in front of a new audience that has not seen the leaked audio yet. And if you haven't already, tap subscribe and turn that notification bell all the way on, because we are tracking the standoff live. The second Rick Ross drops that retaliation record, or the moment Drake's countdown timer hits 0, we are going straight back on the air with an emergency follow-up you absolutely do not want to miss. There is a strong chance we are on air with a fresh breakdown before midnight tonight, and you do not want to be the last one in your group chat to find out what actually happened. Stay locked in. Stay sharp. Keep those receipts screenshotted. Keep your comment section take sharp, and keep one eye on the clock, because in a war of this size, the next update usually lands before anybody in the industry is ready for it. And I will see you in the very next one.